Tēnā rā tātou katoa, nau mai piki mai ki tēnei kōrero e hāngai nei ki te kaupapa o te whenua Māori. Welcome again to another kōrero for the Shift Aotearoa. I'm Brennan Rigby, producing content here for VisionWeek in Aotearoa. Today I think we're almost definitely going to be addressing a conversation that hasn't occurred in VisionWeek and probably hasn't occurred all that much in other forums either, which is this real crisis with developing on Māori land and why it's such a barrier. And I'm lucky and blessed to be joined by Fred Sadler and Roy Hoskins. We're going to take our time to hopefully unpack this conversation. He mihi nui kia kōrua, tēnā rātu kōrua mo te huinga mai ki te kōrero ki tēnei kaupapa. I really appreciate it. So listen, what we'll do firstly is I'll just pass it over to each of you to introduce yourselves and make any opening comments, and then maybe we'll start thinking about the historic context of this issue. Kei te pai, ka pai. Fred, would you like to lead us out?
Tēnā rā koe, Brennan, e mihi koke ne kia koe o te rā. Me mihi atu rā, i wa tātou tini aitua, rātou ko wheturangi tia, rātou ko hikoe to rātou hikoe i runga tamato te whenua. Ko hoki atu rā ki te kāinga tūturu mo tātou te tangata. Ko wehe atu rā, ko hoi atu rā, to rātou waka ki te rerenga wairua, ka white atu ki Hawaii nui, Hawaii roa, Hawaii pāma mau. E te wāhi kore rātou e tahuri muri mai. Ko rātou ngā kaiwhatiwhati ki, ngā kaiwhatiwhati kōrero, a ko te au o te rangi, ko te au o te whenua, kia tūpea mai kia piri, kia tūpea mai kia tata. Ka whiti rere āmanu ki te pai o uanuku. Ka te huri mai ta koutou mātaki, hakamutunga e te au e mahu kene koutou. Ka whiriko ka nunumi e ketua. Nō reira e moi rā koutou. Ka te hei Māori ora ko huri mai ngā rāringa kōro kia tātou. E hari e koa na tangako e Brennan ko tai mai ki tēnei wā ki te kōrero me wa tātou whenua tuku ihoa wa tātou mātua. Ke haka tutuki ai o mātou hihi a tūmana ko. Me he mea tai a mātou i te haka tū o mātou whare i kurunga te whenua. O mātou o nā rātou i tuku mai he taonga mo mātou. O rātou haka tupuranga. E mihi koa koe ki ngā koe e te rangatira e Brennan. E watu mai tēnei wahanga kiao ki te kōrero e tahi kōrero e pākoana ki ngā whenua. O tira, mā te atua tātou i manaki e tia ki te ronga to tātou noho. Kia kite ai tēnā pēr e hua. Kia hakarite o mātou hihi e tūmana ko. Ki te haka tū o tahi e whare ki runga o tātou whenua Māori. E mohina koe te pakaketanga e pākoana ki tēnā kaupapa. Nō reira, e kore kumerua ngamihi atu rā, me wahi o tahi kōrero ki tō tātou hemana. Nā ko taku ingoa ko Fred Sadler. E kau mātou mo te matapihi mai te hanganga i te mātou hui tuatahi i Rotorua. 2010, ne? 2010. Ka hanga ai te matapihi i te 2011. Mahara nau i te marae i Manurewa. I tērā marae ka hakatūhia te matapihi e tirohanga mo te iwi. I tērā wā ko hau me iaena ko hau me rau ngā toinga o ngā trahiti i te timatatanga o te hanganga o te matapihi e tirohanga mo te iwi. Nā nonga, me hoki rā ki taku pepeha ke mohi ai ahu no hea kēhau. Ko tautoro te maunga. Ko punaki tere te aua. Ko Ngāti rangi, Ngāti moirawa te hapu. Te marae, ko te hunga iti. Ko tautoro te maunga. Ko punaki tere te aua. Ko ngā toki matawhaurua te waka. Ko Fred said la tēnei e mihi kōkene kia koutou. Kia ora mai rā tātou.
Kia ora, Fred.
Tēnā koe, Fred, ngā mihi nui. Rui ki te maunga, whakapara te awa, Ngāti hau te hapu, ngā puhi te iwi. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou e whakarungu ana. So yeah, Rau Hoskins, no Ngāti Hau, Ngāti Hao, Ngāti Rahiri, and current chairperson of Te Matapihi, and as Fred has said, one of two inaugural trustees still involved, and pleased to have Fred with us along the whole journey, and also pleased that Matapihi has just recently moved to a long-standing agreement with MHUD to fulfil the role that we're fulfilling and additional roles under a funded arrangement for the next 4 years. So we're very pleased to have reached that milestone. So just in terms of the kaupapa of our discussion today, Māori land, I think most people are aware of the complexities and difficulties navigating their way through Māori land issues, but I just want to briefly speak to some of the potential ways forward so that we can keep the conversation solutions focused as much as possible. But I think first of all, yes, we do need to acknowledge that Māori land is complex and that it is not easy to navigate the Māori land court processes, resource consent processes, building consent processes, funding processes, when we are attempting to build papakainga or even just a single whare on Māori land. So consequently, my strong belief is that we do need regional Māori housing navigators that are skilled in working through the range of issues that are current barriers to building on Māori land. We know that many of those barriers start with our own whānau and with levels of multiple ownership. And as soon as you get more than a single family of owners, then you've got layers of complexity associated with absentee owners, deceased owners, and shareholdings that have not been succeeded to. So those issues aren't going to be solved quickly, but with skilled navigation, we can begin to support whānau with papakainga aspirations. I think the next thing we need to do is accept that those navigators that will be able to walk beside whānau, they need to be working with, 10, 20 or 30 different groups simultaneously, accepting that of those 30 or 40 different groups in the region, there will be half a dozen which are what we call low-hanging fruit that can actually be progressed relatively quickly because their land ownership issues are more simple or they've got better governance in place. Some of the groups they work with will take years and years, maybe 10 years, trying to sort out absentee landowners, etc., etc. So those navigators have got to have quite a spread and work across a continuum of situations. I think next thing that we need is a set of multidisciplinary experts who are mandated to work alongside those navigators who can provide specialist skills, specialist Māori land skills, specialists in land development, specialists in finance, and specialists in resource consent processes as well. So we need to be able to draw on those teams at regional levels. They need to be ideally Māori and certainly with the necessary skills. And so they need to be retained on some sort of ongoing basis for their expertise. The next significant issue, of course, is with councils themselves, and Fred has got a lot of experience in this area, but the first thing I would say is that we need our councils to act as facilitators of papakainga development, not just as an entity which receives and processes applications and applies usual processes to these applications. So it's a change of mindset for our councils to be a facilitator and not merely a bureaucratic barrier to those development aspirations. And that means we've got to have people within councils who can navigate various teams, building consent teams, resource consent teams, planning teams, and unlock the blockages which inevitably are present in these councils. I think the next issue is around finance, and we're all aware of the limitations of the Kāinga Whenua loan scheme. And as I've mentioned previously in a vision statement, we urgently need a replacement for that scheme, and we need to take that scheme away from a single bank who have been quite passive in their role of facilitating the rollout of Kāinga Whenua, namely Kiwi Bank. We need a range of banks who are genuinely interested in actually providing funding, and who will apply appropriate resources, skilled Māori resources, to facilitating those loan applications. So I think we need to maintain a government backing for those loans. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have banks struggling to find a commercial reason to become involved, so that the government guarantee has still got to be there. But we need to have more than one bank involved so we can get some competition and allow our whānau genuine choices in terms of how they finance their papakainga developments and who they finance those developments with. So that's a couple of ways forward. Just to quickly summarise. We really need those navigators, and those navigators could be engaged through TPK and or Kāinga Ora, but those navigators would need to have skills across Māori land law, Māori land development, resource consent processes, building consent processes, and also ideally some knowledge of infrastructure provision. We don't need those individuals to be experts in all areas, but they need to have a broad knowledge so that they know who to bring in to provide specialist expertise. Now, the creation of these navigators is something that Te Matapihi is directly involved with at the present time with the development of our curriculum, Māori housing curriculum, and we've got some funding from MB to actually develop that curriculum. So Tammy Tauroa is working with us presently to build that curriculum up. So we imagine that within 6 months we will be ready to run a pilot Māori Housing Navigators curriculum. And so we look forward to Hapu and Iwi and other Māori groups nominating their keen personnel to come on board with those courses. So that's the first thing, is to have those navigators in place. And then, of course, councils across the board need to up their game with the way that they approach the development of papakainga within their territories. And they need to really embrace the role of facilitators, and whatever that means for their particular rohe. And the next one is finance. We really do need to have a new lending product in place with banks and government-backed guarantee, which will enable the right level of choice, and critically, alongside the choice, the necessary support for those whānau who have got to the point of finance, which is significant in its own right. To even get to the point where you were talking about finance means you've navigated multiple barriers already. But then when you get to that point, that there are brokers and or bank personnel who can really provide direct support to get you across the line into the development phase. That's a starter for 10. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Ro. Fred, do you want to add anything?
Yes, I'd like to add something. So, I try to talk about what Taro is saying, the difficulties of getting finance to build papakainga on Māori land. I've been outspoken for the last 10 odd years from the outset of the introduction of the kainga whenua loans. We've gone through, as a whānau, gone through the process of going through TPK, receiving not the infrastructure grant, the funding for the technical engineering that done on the land. We spent, we were given, I think it was $25,000 to for the feasibility studies, but they went into a deep hole, primarily because we didn't have the funding for the vertical build, and so that money just disappeared into a big hole. The infrastructure grant given by TPK is given because you have the funding for the vertical build. So, you know, TPK is a government organisation. They have the funds to do the feasibility studies and the funds to do the infrastructure grant. And my take on that is that looking at direct funding by government, loans through government that occurred in the 50s, 60s with the family benefit, the way of paying back those loans. But unfortunately, those houses that were built in the 60s were built on general title land, and most of if not all of the houses that were built under the Māori Affairs scheme were built on general title land. As Ro was saying, that even with we need the backing of the government, similar to what they are doing with the kainga whenua loans, where the government would underwrite those loans. But however, I guess as Ro pointed out, that we need to have other banks. Westpac used to be the banks that we, the Housing New Zealand used to work through. We need to encourage other financial banking institutions to have some input, rather than just staying with Kiwi Bank. And it was hard working through Kiwi Bank. They themselves weren't fully understanding of the kind of whenua loans and how they worked. So I'd leave that there at this point in time. Maybe, though you might want to add a little bit more to what I've said. But that's it has the kind of whenua loans have failed to provide Māori housing at large on Māori land. It's so complex. You know, you've got to go through whānau first, and that can be a challenge, a real challenge. If you don't have enough whenua trust, it makes it difficult when you have multiple on land and going through the whānau dynamics, and then going through the Māori Land Court, and then going across to the councils, and with their district plans and trying to conform with their district plans sometimes makes it quite difficult getting through the resource consent and building consent processes. It makes it quite difficult, and it could take years. And we're no closer. My parents wanted to build on the land many years ago, and their aspirations and dreams had not come to fruition. And we're at the same age as my parents, and we're having the same difficulties. The aspirations and dreams that we've had of wanting to settle on our land has just blown away in the wind. It makes it really difficult. So no reira e tātou mā ko te wene o e tahi o ngā kōrero. Tēnā pēr he oranga kei kona hotira. Tēnā pēr he hurahi māma o tātou ki te hanga o tātou wharerunga o tātou whenua tuku iho o tātou mātu. Me wahi o enei kōrero ki reira.
Kia ora, Fred. Tēnā rau atu koe for sharing, especially the personal elements of that story. I mean, to think of your parents struggling with exactly the same regulatory problems, you know, barriers to your own whānau flourishing within the regulatory environment around Māori land. It's really extraordinary. I think a bit of an indictment on New Zealand, to be frank. So, Ro, I wonder if I can just pose that a little bit to you, because I want to go over a few things that you mentioned in your opening. Because firstly, thank you so much for sort of setting out that very pragmatic pathway that you've developed for the different skill sets and different changes we need in the system to enable this to happen. But I'm going to try and unpack some of it, because I want this to be meaningful for an audience who doesn't know a lot about the space. So I guess one thing is, maybe if you could just spend a minute even just explaining what that regulatory or even legislative background is. And I know that's hard to do, but you know, just to make the point that it is actually. So I'm asking myself the question, what are these barriers and where do they come from? And I think what's important to make the point is that they're kind of legislative. But then if you can jump on to the kāinga whenua loans and just explain, I guess, what it is and maybe why it's not quite working. And then once again, we'll just take it from there. Is that okay, Ro?
Kia ora, Brendan. Yeah, I guess just briefly, the historical context, of course, is really starts with multiple ownership. And of course, originally, Māori land blocks ownership was limited to 13 individuals, and that was to try and make those land blocks more accessible for acquisition. And so that was the first step. I think much later in the piece, we moved to a situation in 1953 in the Māori Land Act, where, of course, by that time we could have unlimited numbers of owners. And by that stage, we were getting unlimited numbers of owners with at that stage, no such thing as whānau trust. So we had the both two types of Māori land ownership, 438 trusts and 439 trusts. And the 438 trust was the effectively a marae trust or reserve trust. And the 439 was the effectively the ahu whenua trust, which is where we have multiple land ownership. So you have individual shareholdings, and of course what's occurred over time is fragmentation of those shareholdings to the point where every owner hands on equal shares of their land block to generally to all their children. So we get these minuscule shareholdings, and sometimes literally thousands of owners. I mean, we're shareholders in, say, 3B2 block, which is, I think, is up to 10,000 owners now, which is the only benefit of having so many owners is that the land is almost protected by the inertia of the number of landowners. So no one can do anything, no one can make decisions because it's so fragmented. So, I mean, that's a little bit of the, just when you've got, say, 100 landowners, the normal rule of thumb is 1/3 will be deceased, 1/3 will be inactive, uncontactable, and then 1/3 will be contactable. So if on a really, really good day, if you wanted to get a meeting of those landowners together, you may get 10. That would be a really good turnout, 10. Now, the Māori Land Court is not going to accept any decisions made by only 10 out of 100 owners. And yet that's a good day. So, I mean, therein the first issue is, as Fred has said, just getting the whānau together to make decisions is incredibly difficult. And of course, you've first of all got to normally update your governance arrangements. You may not even still have an ahu whenua trust or a whānau trust in place. So you've really first of all got to do that. And you've got to have that first up meeting and agreement to actually start that process off. Our whānau are lucky insofar as our land blocks have got fewer owners, and so we're able to make decisions much more rapidly. But still we face, of course, all the other barriers. We face the barriers of access, in a way the same as Fred's whānau at Ohawini, is the issue of access, which is title, and then the ability to get reticulated power and through to our sites. So our issues for our whānau are more on the infrastructure and the council, whāngarei district councils, historical lack of support for these processes. We came to apply for a resource consent for our papakainga about 20 years ago, and the planner at the time said, "What's a papakainga?" You know, and that's an indictment on our education system, where our planners were emerging without any knowledge of Māori land and what papakainga were or could be. So once again, you know, we've got, you know, we could list barrier on barrier on barrier, but I think the key issue is that in the last 10, 15 years, there are papakainga that have been developed around the motu, despite all the barriers that exist, and they are testament to the fortitude of those whānau, and particularly they've relied on key navigators, people in the community who had enough skills in one area to be useful, and then those individuals have progressively added further skills to their knowledge base, and they've been able to work with whānau to develop papakainga. So I'm talking principally in Tauranga Moana and Heretaunga, also in Taitukerau, some in Taitukerau as well, and a few others around the motu. So the fact that those key individuals were absolutely critical to the success of those developments is the reason why we at Te Matapi have put such a focus on developing navigators around the motu, finding people who've got a real ngākau for Māori housing developments, papakainga developments, who we can support into playing leading roles in their rohe. Moving back to the Kāinga Whenua loan scheme, I think that the key issue is the fact that Kiwi Bank were nominated to become the funder or the bank that would actually provide the loans. It's not a role that they ever sought. It's not a role that was ever going to be lucrative for them. So consequently, they never applied sufficient resource or priority to that loan product, and generally their lack of enthusiasm for that product meant that by far the majority of applicants were turned down because of their conservative approach to allocation of those loans. So it's, first of all, it's you've got to, the first issue is that it's a baby that was an orphan that Kiwi Bank never wanted to look after in the first place, and secondly, there was no financial incentive for them to really add the resources that were required. And thirdly, in terms of people like Fred's whānau, the criteria are too narrow. It meant that it was incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for a retired or semi-retired individual or whānau or set of whānau members to qualify for the Kāinga Whenua loan. And so that's discriminatory. Why shouldn't semi-retired or retired whānau have the right to build on their own whenua? That's a couple of perspectives on Kāinga Whenua. So my view is that Kāinga Whenua has already been tweaked a couple of times. It's beyond tweaking. It needs to be rebuilt from scratch. One criticism that's been levelled at the loan scheme is that it was a modification of the Welcome Home loan scheme. It was never designed from scratch for the purposes of enabling Māori to build on Māori land. It was a hybrid from a non-Māori loan product.
Yeah, I took that, Brennan, it wasn't set up, it was a first home ownership program. It wasn't, you can't take that program and just put it over here and then call it Kāinga Whenua. It's just not going to work. And it provides for those who really can afford to build. It didn't focus on need. It focused on people that were able to get finance themselves, to finance and build on their whenua. But then if you were able to get finance, and why would you go through the Kāinga Whenua product? You would rather go through the bank and get direct funding from the bank. But it never provided at large for Māori building of houses on Māori land. So my spiel on that, and then I totally agree with Rau, it needs to be unpacked. It needs to have rebuilding once again from the bottom up. So I tautoko what Rau is saying, and I do tautoko the fact that we do need navigators that have the skill set to make this become a success. You need people that have knowledge of the local government local government and have the resource consents and building consents. And you need those who are conversant with the Māori land court processes. So, you know, you need those people who have those skill sets to make this work for us.
Kia ora, Fred, and Ro again. So, Ro, can I just check in with you? I'd like you to also unpack a little bit, I guess, the word alienation or inalienability, or however you want to talk about that, just to kind of clarify that issue that kind of sits beneath the difficulty of some of the difficulty of getting finance. But clearly you're confident that that there's a financially viable set of tools that can enable appropriate lending and appropriate finance on Māori land. As you've said, you know, kāinga whenua. Well, listen, the view I've got is that you're of the view that it's possible to do this. So could you unpack that alienation issue that kind of sits beneath it, but then maybe just clarify for me a little bit what makes it possible in the future?
Yeah, I guess the key issue with general issue with lending on Māori land, multiply owned Māori land, is because the land is inalienable under the Ture Whenua Act, that the land cannot be sold in the event that mortgages are not paid. So consequently, the dwelling itself is considered to be the collateral, and so the dwelling in the last resort is able to be removed. And that's been the case since the early papakainga lending products that came through in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, even through to LDRL and other lending products that were around at the time. So effectively means that you can't build on a concrete slab. So it means that your buildings have timber floors and timber piles so that the building can be uplifted. What that means is that you don't have the thermal benefits of building on a slab. In other words, you can get good passive thermal heating from a well-oriented dwelling with a concrete slab facing north, which can receive heat during the day and re-release that at night. And the other benefit that you don't have, of course, is accessibility. Concrete slab means that you don't have ramps and decks and steps and so on. And so you can make your whare much more accessible to disabled and elderly whānau members. So that's an issue associated with inalienable Māori land. So that's a dimension which we would like to be addressed as part of any revamped or new Māori loan instrument, that the requirement for the buildings or dwellings to be removed is actually taken away from that equation, and that other means are applied to ensure that the lender is not left out of pocket. And they would primarily, those other means would be through the collateral being provided by another entity. It may be a central fund where the collateral is actually provided, and that fund is made available. And that may be that an entity like Te Tumu Kāinga may be in a situation to provide that umbrella support for loans on multiply owned Māori land. The other issue that is probably relevant to talk about with kāinga whenua is really the fact that we only have a single lender, and a single lender has all the issues of monopoly. And of course, when you have a monopoly, you don't have to up your game, and certainly Kiwibank have not. And we really want banks involved who are genuinely interested and who can administer a loan product which provides them with enough incentives to want to be involved, which once again requires the government to be part of the solution here.
Kia ora, Anoro. So I heard on the grapevine that $1 billion was recently put aside to help securitize kāinga ora lending for their business. Would that sort of amount do the trick, do you think?
$1 billion would go a long way. Absolutely, it would. Even less would. Even 100 million set aside as a fund would be sufficient to act as that level of collateral or a backstop for a large number of loans on Māori land. So if 100 million was set aside for the collateral backstop, and then the other 900 was set aside for lending and or mix of lending and grant finance, then I think we'd be well on the way.
And that would have obviously national reach, and give me a ballpark on, what you could possibly develop in, say, 10 years. Not you personally, obviously.
Yeah, I think that we've got a huge amount of unmet demand in the papakainga space. We've got people who have put their aspirations to build on their own whānau land in the too hard basket, and partly because they've heard how difficult it is, or partly because they've already started on that journey and given up. So we've got a massive number of trusts and individuals who've given up for now anyway. And what they need is they need to be given the confidence that actually they can go back and begin to readdress those aspirations with appropriate support, specialist support, and secondly, a range of products, loan products, which will mean that if they can get through the other processes, that they can actually secure necessary finance to build. And I do still believe that that will need to be a mix of grant and loan funding, including infrastructure grants, the Kāinga Whenua infrastructure grant, which has probably been a better product. It's in the last 6-7 years been quite useful, in fact imperative to a number of papakainga developments that actually have been completed. So I think the Kāinga Whenua infrastructure grant could remain in a similar form to that it is currently, but it's the actual vertical build product or products which need to be rebuilt from scratch. Awesome, thanks, Ro.
And I've got a couple of things that sort of front of mind. One is we may run out of time, and that's fine. But I understand there's quite a range of kind of design limitations that come onto the build because of this requirement to be removable. And if you want to, you could cover those off. Obviously, as an architect, you'd be able to do so pretty quickly. I guess the other thing is I wanted to pick up on your. So firstly, I'm super excited to hear that you're pressing for a curriculum is getting some traction, and I honestly look forward to a world where people can really go and get some mātauranga associated to these issues and be speaking the same language and all of those things. So he nui te mihi atu ki a koe e whai ani tēnā kaupapa I ngā wā. But let's talk about local government for a sec, because obviously that's an important kaupapa. And what I've understood is that and it's only natural that in the local government space, our approaches to papakainga nationally vary greatly from region to region. So that's a little bit problematic, but you've mentioned a few of the things that you'd like local government to move towards. Maybe you could refresh those. But also, so do we need legislative reform here, or do we need people in the regions influencing? Do we need a manifesto? How can we achieve those changes in that local government space?
Well, there are other people with a view on this that can be brought into this conversation, but a couple of key points. We absolutely need every local government entity to have fit for purpose papakainga legislation, so that they actually have district plan provisions for papakainga. A few around the country have proven that it can be done. Tauranga District Council, Western Bay District Council, Whangarei District, and Heretaunga as well, Hastings District, and probably a few others as well. They've actually proactively gone out and looked at their district plan provisions for papakainga. So that's the first thing that councils need to do. We know that some councils are going to be quicker off the mark than others, and so the other thing that would be useful is to look at a national policy statement on papakainga, so that we can actually, across the board, enable Māori to more readily develop their papakainga developments by effectively cutting across the various district plans that exist. So that I think we do need to look at things that are from a national level as well as a local level. So I think next we need local governments just to make papakainga development in their areas a priority. They tend to, most local governments far north in particular, tend to see Māori land as just the bane of their lives. It's just where they get no rating, they get no rates paid from, and they're continually trying to chase rates. And so they just see Māori land as a problem in their areas as opposed to a significant resource. And so we need a change of attitude from local government, and that comes from the top. And then once that attitude has been shifted or enhanced from the council politicians' perspective, then we need the right staffing and units development, Māori land units to be developed within councils, so that they can be the facilitators and not part of the barrier that we've discussed already.
I think the problem, Brendan, up here, we have three councils. We have the Kaipara District Council, the Whangarei District Council, and you have the Far North District Council. And my view is that they need to have their policies on papakainga mirrored across those three councils. It's quite difficult when we're dealing. At the moment, we're trying to set up our papakainga now down on our farm under the Far North District Council, and it's more difficult dealing with them than we had dealing with the Whangarei District Council because it's a controlled activity. Whereas with the Whangarei District Council, it's a permitted activity. Papakainga is a permitted activity, and it makes it a lot more simpler to work with. We had no problems going with Whangarei District Council. That was no problem. The problem was working with TPK and through the kainga whenua product. That was the problem. And dealing with the Kiwi Bank situation, where they, as Rau has pointed out, they having a monopoly So it would be advantageous if all of those councils, those three councils, were to have a mirrored process for papakainga on the district planes right across those three councils.
Absolutely agree. And if you can look at the best possible council policies around the motu and customise them for your particular region, that's a very good way to begin. And Whangarei has got good provision. It took them a while, but they did get there, and have to acknowledge some of the key councillors and staff in the past who've taken Whangarei from one of the poorer performing councils to be one of the best in terms of the actual local body legislation.
Kia ora. There's a ratings issue in there that you flagged, Ro, but you know, suffice to say, ratings got its complexities on Māori land, and those complexities go for the owners and for the local government entity, I guess, mostly to do with the disbursement of the ownership itself, right? You want to comment on that?
Well, there is some Māori land rating law amendment happening at present, and while I don't know that it's going to go as far as we would all like, I mean, I think what we would actually like is that Māori land should not be rateable. If it can't be sold and is incredibly difficult to develop, then why should it be rateable? So that would be most people's, Māori people's position. I think the provisions that they're putting in place are going part of the way, which is probably helpful, but it's the rating issues is the subject of another webinar, I think.
You know, the rating, there has been a submission put out for the by Nanaya for the rating review, and I agree with what Ro is saying. The whole idea of the valuation of Māori land is for rates. That's the whole basis of valuation of Māori land. But you know, the Crown don't pay rates. We're a partnership with the Crown. Why should we pay rates? If they want to pay rates, want us to pay rates, then go to the Crown and get the Crown to pay the rates for us. But that might be radical. But I mean, that's the truth of it. You've got the rating and also the Tura Whenua Act being reviewed. Some of that has already occurred. But those two together, they're not meshed together. And there is a difficulty, in my view, with part of the Rating Act the rating review was to enable building housing on Māori freehold land. But that won't occur because you still have the problems of going through the local government and complying with their district plans. So there's still that block there at the moment with some of our councils.
Kia ora matua, e horora nei na whakaro e pāna ki tēnei kaupapa. And I guess from my perspective, it's a bit strange, you know. I mean, I think if there's a legislative regime in place or a regulatory regime in place which is compromising the ability of Māori to develop their land, then surely there is some obligation on the Crown to manage the rating regime, because it's a legislative impairment that's preventing that land actually creating economic or social or cultural benefit. So I think, I mean, I'm sure that argument's been made, but anyway, thanks for sharing your whakaaro on it, and I'm sure that both your expertise and your personal views on it will be really, really valued by anyone who happens to listen into our webinar. So kia ora koroa. I guess we'll wrap up there, but I will give you another chance to just say some final words, whether you want to pick up on a kaupapa that we've covered, or if you'd just like to introduce a new subject briefly, or in particular, if you'd like to give us a 90-second vision for the future of housing in your mind, I'd really welcome that. So I'll just do a quick whakakapi for the webinar audience, and then I'll come back to you for those final kōrero. Kei te pai?
Kei te pai.
Ka pai. All right, kia ora koutou e whakarongo mai ana. I'm Brennan Rigby from the Shift Aotearoa, and this has been a totally great and really engaging conversation about an issue that doesn't get anywhere enough mainstream coverage, which is the barriers and the difficulties in developing on Māori land. But as Ro beautifully reframed my introduction, actually let's talk about the solutions to those problems instead of waiting around in the 160 years of barriers that have been put in place. So kia ora Fred Sadler. Tēnā noi te mihatu ki a koe, nau nei tō tātou karaki, tēnei i tēnei wā, nau nei hoki te mātaurangi homai nei ki tēnei kōrero, ki a koe hoki i rau, he mihi nui tēnei ki a koe. So I'm just going to pass back to maybe Ro in the first instance, because that gives me a chance just to pass it to you, Fred, to close up the hui for us. So, Ro, final thoughts or a vision or kei a koe?
Yeah, I think it would be really good to see an extension of this webinar. We've got so many other people who could make really good contributions to this discussion of Māori land as it applies to Māori land development and Papakainga development. It would be great to see some of our Māori land lawyers contributing to a parallel webinar, and similarly some of our other existing navigators who've been active in this space. It would be great to see those people jump onto this kaupapa as well. So please to just maybe be part of an introductory conversation here with Matua Fred today, and provide some commentary. I think a final comment would be that we do now have 10 or 15 Papakainga development that have been completed to a good standard in the last 10 years. And I think if we can make contact with those particular navigators and or whānau or marae who've developed them, and look to springboard off those successes. We've covered some of the barriers, but what's been shown is that you can actually overcome those barriers with the right level of skill and determination. So it can be done. The barriers will, we hope, progressively be diminished. But even within the current regulatory framework, funding framework, it can be done. So I'd like to leave on a positive note to encourage our whānau to look at those ones that have got across the line, build on those successes, and look to be exemplars in your own rohe that others can be inspired by and learn from. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora Ro. And again, just acknowledge firstly your very good point. Aroha atu ki a koutou. The other experts in the space, this has all been pulled together. All of my programming for VisionWeek has been pulled together pretty quickly. So I've been in a position to take the people I've been able to reach out to. So absolutely acknowledge your point that that there's many other experts that could add a lot to these kōrero. But Ro, just finally from me, I'd like to acknowledge your, let's say, your enduring aspiration and desire to work in the space, know the space, and support others, with a great vision for the future. So kia ora, Ro. Good to talk to you again. And kia koe, Fred, and if you'd like to share some whakaaro, and then you can, I'd love it if you could whakakapi o tātou kōrero i tēnei rangi.
Tēnā koe. Yes, there are some success stories. Papa Moa, it was led out by Victoria Kingi. That's been a success story in itself. We can learn from people like that, and also down in Heretonga, where there has been success stories around papakainga, led there by Paul Sheeran down there, and there are many other success stories around papakainga. They have endured the blockages, and I guess if we were to look to them to not reinvent the wheel, but to get some direction from them on how they have made it a success for them, then maybe those solutions can be spread more to eyes to help others who are struggling with building on their Māori land. So I'll close with that, and once again, thank you, Brennan, for inviting us into this session with you. Mā te atu a tātou I manaki tiaki I ngā wā katoa, nō reira I hakakapi ai tō tātou noho. E ihua o ngā mano ko tēnei mātou, o tā mai te hakamutenga tō mātou noho I te aiahi nei. Tuku atu mātou hakawhatai, hakamamiti te kia koe mau manakitanga I taka mai ki rungi mātou. A hakoa e rere ana tēnei ngāngara lefa I roto te au, puta noa te au, whānui e pā, manaki tia mātou e noho nei, mātou kuia kau mātou rātou e mate ana rātou e mawiti ana ke tuku mai turinga āwhina ki rungi rātou. Me wa tātou tini whanaunga raro te kapu e te pauri, e tangi ana mo rātou ko whetirangi tia, rātou ko hikoe ke tua te rai. Ke puta ai rātou te whai au ki te amarama. Me te ino e kahatura kia koe, ke noho tata mai koe, ke manaki tia o mātou taitamaliki, o mātou mokapuna, ke te whai mai muri a mātou. Ke teki pai rātou, ke tupua ke he rangatira mo mātou a pōpō. Nō reire pātuku atu e ni ino e kahatura kia koe, mai te whenua ki te rangi. Mau hakamana mai o mātou hi he tūmana o tuku atura kia koe, roto te unga tapu. Tāu tamatu tātou kaipoko ra koe hukraiti. Āmene.
Āmene.
Tēnā la tātou. Kia ora mai.